Welcome back to Barely Qualified Picks. We are here with our college football Week 5 picks. And if you looked at the column headline, then you know that this is a Road Warriors week. We're going to be talking about a lot of road teams that we expect to win and cover in a big Week 5 this week. This is one of the biggest weeks on the college football schedule. We've got Oregon at Penn State. We've got Bama at Georgia. We're not going to talk about Bama at Georgia. Look, I don't know which way that game's going to go. Good luck to them both. You've got, two very big trends opposing each other, with Georgia's home streak going against Bama's 9-1 last 10 against Georgia. No idea how that's going to turn out, but really excited about a bunch of road teams this week. And I do have one team that's a home lean in the others receiving votes. So let's see how that turns out. Just as a reminder, we were 4-1 last week with our top 5, so we're looking to continue that and stay well into the black with our picks this week. Feeling pretty good about the picks this week. As we think about a road trip, as we think about the wind in your hair, the open road, as we think about the freedom that comes with seeing a new place and discovering the world, there's one thing better than a road trip, and it is a road trip based around a college football game, a big college football game. Whether you're driving there, whether you're flying there, there is something to going into enemy territory, dealing with the hostility of fans, sometimes real, sometimes not real, sometimes very friendly, sometimes very not friendly. Looking at you, LSU fans. Some of my best memories in life have been born of road trips, but some of my very best have been born of college football road trips, whether those are trips to Cal and Stanford in the Bay, or down to Memorial Coliseum in USC, going to Phoenix and Scottsdale for big games, Jerry World. Just last year, going to Indianapolis for the Big Ten title game against Penn State. One thing is really consistent when we go to these games as Duck fans. You're going to be outmatched. Like, generally speaking, the opposing team is going to have a lot more fans than we are. It's usually 85-15, maybe if we're lucky, 80-20. But, for the most part, there is no such thing as a neutral site game when you have a school like Oregon with its alumni base and the size of its fan base in the state of Oregon. Even as much as Oregon has grown in popularity across the country, it's still small compared to the Michigans and the Alabamas and the Floridas and the Penn States. And so these neutral site games end up being real road tests. And that is going to work in our favor this week. There was one time, though, I got to say, before we jump into the picks, there was one time that it was all Ducks all the way, and that was the 2015 Rose Bowl. I went on a road trip with my brother John. We started in Eugene. It was supposed to be like 13 hours from Eugene, on over from I-5 down to Highway 97, 97 down to I-5, and on back down to LA and Pasadena for the Rose Bowl. It did not go as planned. We called a couple of hot routes. Well, I called a couple of hot routes. John's my little brother. He went along for the ride, as any little brother at that point would and should. And, we had a couple ways that we could go. We could take the long way all the way down I-5, or we could take this Highway 58, across Oregon, center of the state, jump down Highway 97, and that was going to give us a lot more flexibility on how we got down to LA if we wanted to dodge off to Reno. If we wanted to do that, we could very easily. We would avoid a second pass. So we decided we were going to do that, and we got about an hour up Highway 58, and there was a ton of snow. There's a small ski resort right up Highway 58 that doesn't even always have enough snow to entertain skiers, Willamette Pass, but this day it definitely had enough snow, and we were in a Kia Optima with front-wheel drive that was just not going to get it done. So after an hour of valiant effort, we decided to turn around, make the journey back to I-5, take the long route. On that journey, my brother fell asleep, and as I was driving south, I started thinking about this Duck game and how much I believed in Marcus Mariota, and how much I believed in Devin Allen and Darren Carrington, and how much I believed in Royce Freeman at running back in that offensive line, and the fact that nobody could stop that offense all year. Nobody. Every defense had to line up in a two-high safety set, and so nobody could balance. How do you bring enough guys in the box to slow down the thunder and lightning of Royce Freeman and still have coverage over the top against these two incredible NFL talent wide receivers in Allen and Carrington. And so going into that Florida State game, the spread was 8 in favor of Oregon. Felt like a trap. You don't see a lot of 8s. Usually you're going to see a 6.5, a 7, 7.5. But it was 8, 8.5. I thought, the only reason it's not 10 is because there's a lot of respect around the country for Florida State, and there still wasn't a lot of respect for Oregon in 2015, at least not outside of the Northwest, not outside of the former Pac-12, rest in peace. I was really confident, and so John was asleep, and that left me with an executive decision to make. We were going east. Around Sacramento, we jaunted over. We got all the way over to Reno, made it through a mountain pass that was fortunately not nearly as bad as Highway 58. Those two front wheels got us all the way into Reno, where we stopped at the Pepper Mill, which is a fine Reno establishment. And we put down our bet, $500 on the Ducks at -8. Thank you, John, because he had a lot more of the cash than I did. And ATM limits were low when you had no money to take out at that time. So, not that I had no money, but he had the cash on him, and that's what we did. And so we went from Reno down to Pasadena. There was a different vibe. The Rose Bowl is always a really chill vibe. It's on the golf course. You got people slanging hot dogs. That was an interesting one. Florida State fans not really having come to the Rose Bowl. Most of the time you see a Big Ten team there. Been to the Rose Bowl several times. So usually it's like a fan base that's coming back and they understand and appreciate the granddaddy of them all and the ambiance and the environment. Florida State fans were a little wide-eyed at it. Very nice people, I will say, unlike LSU fans, very nice people. And those Florida State fans, man, they were confident that this was going to be a blowout. -8. Like, I can't tell you how many people I ran into that were, betting on their phones, talking about how it was going to be a blowout victory and they should be betting -8 the other way for Florida State. Of course, the game did not work out the way the Florida State fans thought and hoped and dreamed that it would. Royce Freeman didn't necessarily get untracked in that game, but his backmate, running back Thomas Tyner, certainly did. He had 124 yards and 2 touchdowns. He averaged 9.5 yards per carry. He was just too much for that Florida State defense. Marcus Mariota threw for 338 easy yards and 2 touchdowns. The Duck defense recovered 4 fumbles and picked off Jameis. A couple of those fumbles coming from NFL star, former Vikings running back Dalvin Cook, and then also Jameis on that 58-yard scoop and score where he fumbled it behind him. Now, that game was unfortunately followed by the Ohio State National Championship game where, Oregon did not necessarily get the outcome it was looking for against Ezekiel Elliott and the Buckeyes. But that is a story of both injury and NCAA institutional failure for us to cover another day, not today. For now, let's get on to the picks. After really poring over this week's slate of games, it was hard to find many attractive spots for home teams. I've said that a couple of times, but truly, this is a Road Warriors week. As we looked at the week, kind of starting in chronological order, we start with our first pick, which is tonight, Army at ECU. We're picking Army plus 5.5. Both teams are coming off of a tough loss. Army lost last week at North Texas, where they got down early and then they had to fight their way back. They actually did force overtime, but still lost by a touchdown in overtime to a North Texas team that was coming off a huge win over WSU. So North Texas, not sure that they're not really good, at least for a group of 5 type team. ECU coming off a big loss to BYU, kind of got dominated all over the place by BYU, and both teams are looking to get back on track and count up their first win in the American Conference. Now, I generally stay away from Thursday or short week games unless there's some kind of X factor that makes me lean in a direction. This, particular week, we're talking about an early Thursday game. So these guys are going to be much fresher than if we were talking about a Thursday game in week 9 or week 10. We're talking about, in this case, picking Army. We're talking about guys that are trained to go to war. The Army recruits are smart. They are accomplished. They are super fit. I really believe that if you are looking at a short week and the challenges that come with that tough turnaround, the success is going to be found on the margins, and the margins is going to be how well prepared are you to play this game on Thursday. And I think the Army team is going to be really well prepared to play this game. I think not a lot of injury concerns either direction. We're coming off of the matchup last year that Army won 45-28. That was a game that frankly wasn't as close as it seemed. ECU did cover. There were 18.5 point underdog, but they were down 24-0 at halftime. They were down 38-7 after 3 quarters. That is as a backdoor cover gets. So, Army last year, very talented team, well-decorated backfield between Bryson Daly and Udo. Can't remember his first name. Kyron Udo. This year, they're having to replace a lot in the backfield. Dwayne Coleman so far at quarterback has gotten the job done, and that 2024, nation's best offensive line continues to churn yards. The offense was number 1 in rushing offense in the NCAA last year. Looks like it very well could finish number 1 in rushing offense this year. And, going up against an ECU team that's going to want to pass the ball quite a bit. Caton Hauser is back. He played in this game last year, but he only returns 3 other offensive starters with him from 2024. That was a team that lost a lot to the portal. They got some from the portal, but, ECU was more of a feeder than a taker. And it's going to be interesting to see if ECU is, materially better prepared to take on the tactical scheme and the precision and execution excellence of Army. Army lost their top 2 cornerbacks themselves to the portal, so they didn't come out unscathed this year. That could bode well for ECU's passing game, but I suspect that, what we've seen so far, they definitely got some challenge against North Texas, which really wants to throw the ball. I don't think that ECU is going to be necessarily a better passing offense than North Texas, and I think going through that fire last week is going to have those guys much better prepared for the game that they're going to play on tonight, Thursday, not on Saturday. Ultimately, schedule disparity, I believe a lot in your schedule either making you or breaking you. I think in a year where you're able to win some hard-fought close games, you find out a lot about yourself as a team. In those games late in the year, you have a greater chance of winning, especially the close ones. I think similarly, sometimes teams start with a really tough early slate and they get crushed by competition and it breaks their will. And a team then loses games that maybe in an alternate universe they wouldn't lose. Well, I look at Army, and Army obviously 1-2. We've got the win over Kansas State, which is a really strong win. Kansas State was a preseason top 25 team, sandwiched by losses to North Texas and Tarleton State, which has obviously been a surprise this year, but has backed up that win with pretty good play since. Army has been through the fire. I think at 1-2, they're not broken. I don't think their will is anything close to broken. I think they're really eager to get back to even and then make this a successful year. They could go on a big run. They know their scheme. Todd Monken coaching staff has been in place for a number of years. I think a steady hand guides the ship. And ECU, on the other hand, has played 2 total cupcakes that they've easily crushed. Don't know that you learn that much from that. And then they've lost pretty decisively to the 2 Power 4 teams that they've faced. So even though this line opened at -4.5 in favor of ECU and it's moved in ECU's favor to 5.5, that only makes me more confident in Army. So I will take Army with the 5.5, and I actually like Army on the money line. I think they're going to win this one outright, 28-27. All right. Second game on our docket is Florida State, a 6.5 point favorite at Virginia tomorrow, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. First off, when you think about the coaching staff, obviously this is the CEO of the team. This is the spiritual leader. Florida State head coach Mike Norvell is in his 6th year, and this is a critical bounce back campaign coming off of that 2-10 stinker last year where they started so highly ranked. And sometimes you go, have they hit rock bottom? Last year, you knew Florida State hit rock bottom. That was bad. And I think that Mike Norvell and his coaching staff have a burning desire to do everything possible to erase the stink of that campaign this year. And I think that means winning big games against Miami in a couple of weeks. I think it also means putting these mid-tier ACC teams back in their place where they used to be when Florida State was Florida State. And I think that we're going to see that this week. UVA's best win so far is a very bad Stanford team. Stanford sucks. Like they started the year looking very bad against Hawaii, and they've only looked as bad or worse since they've gone on. The NC State loss is neither good nor bad. I'm not sure what we make of NC State. They just got hammered by Duke in a game where they just couldn't play 4 quarters of good football. And conversely, Florida State showed its A game against Bama, and then after scoring 31 on Bama, showed its uncapped scoring potential against Kent State in a 66-10 win, and then threw in 77 in a cupcake win. I think against UVA, just in terms of the eyeball test and what Florida State needs to do to earn respect, they should be winning this game by 3 to 4 touchdowns. I think statistically, you are only more convinced of that. Now, Florida State has put up some huge offensive numbers, and again, against Kent State and in their other cupcake game, like they didn't give anything up. So I think those numbers are skewed a bit, but those Bama numbers are real, where they won 31-17. And, I think you look at Florida State's number 1 in ACC total offense with 628 yards per game. UVA, number 2 with 564 yards per game, and they've been slinging it with 313 yards per game. But I think like a mid-tier ACC team that's been throwing the ball around on lesser competition, the likes of Stanford, is going to face a rude awakening against a Florida State defense that is still a bunch of blue chip guys. They're going to be long, rangy, athletic, and fast in the secondary. I do not think that UVA is going to maintain their position as the number 2 offense in the ACC coming out of this game. You look at the other side, Florida State as the number 3 defense. I think that's real because they've played Alabama and they didn't give up any free filler points in their other 2 games. UVA, they're 5th. Okay, so they're middle of the pack. I think that they're going to be below 5th after dealing with the Florida State offense. And of course, that Florida State offense has a transfer quarterback, but that transfer quarterback, Tommy Castellanos, has history against UVA. He comes from Boston College, where he played against UVA each of the last 2 years. And, I think when you look at what he had surrounding him at Boston College versus what he has surrounding him at Florida State, it's night and day. He's got way better talent around him. And even without that better talent, he split the series with Virginia. He won 27-24 in 2023. And then he lost 24-14 in 2024, but he had 254 passing yards, couple touchdowns, threw a couple of picks. Again, much less talented supporting cast. I think when you combine his knowledge and experience with, that Tony Elliott defense from Virginia with the more talented supporting cast of Florida State, it should work out nicely for Tommy Castellanos. Now, I think coming back to the main point, you get into the weeds and all of that, Florida State needs to step on throats this year. UVA's is a throat it needs to step on. Let's see if they do it. My prediction is that they will. Give me Florida State in a game that isn't as close as the final score, 31-20 over the Cavaliers. All right, so now I want to talk about the game that I've been most excited about this week. Scott Frost and the UCF Golden Knights going into Manhattan, Kansas to take on the 1-3 Kansas State Wildcats. That game is being played start of the day on Saturday, 12 p.m. Eastern time. UCF is off to a strong 3-0 start. Obviously, Scott Frost led UCF to that magical run in 2017, 13-0 record, declared themselves the national champions. It's like giving yourself a nickname. Typically, you don't do that unless you're Kobe, but okay, we're going to set that aside. UCF were the national champions in 2017. Scott Frost ended up leaving, going back to coach his alma mater, Nebraska, where he was an epic player in the mid-90s, national champion. It didn't work out. Nebraska has not worked out for anybody of recent past. And Matt Rule's there now. We're not going to talk about Nebraska today. I like Matt Rule. If anybody can turn it around, it's Rule. That's what he does. He's in year 2. Let's see. But it didn't work out for Scott Frost. And now Scott Frost is back in Central Florida. Central Florida is a massive school. It's in Orlando. You're talking about a recruiting hotbed. They've got access to tremendous talent, even being surrounded by the Miamis and the Floridas and the Florida States of the world and the South Floridas to a lesser degree. UCF can recruit some players for sure. And Scott Frost knows how to do that. He also understands what it takes, having coached at a big Power Four conference program the last couple of years, to manage the NIL and bring in the right guys and manage that budget. UCF, not surprisingly, off to a good start. They blew out the Belichicks, Bill and Steve, the UNC Belichicks last week, 34-9, and now seeking their first Big 12 win of the year. I think when you look at Kansas State, they're in a very different place. Kansas State came into the season number 17. There was a lot of hype with over half of the offense returning. The Big 12 was kind of wide open, what was going to happen. Quarterback Avery Johnson, dual threat, can pass, can throw. Sort of dark horse Heisman hype candidate, maybe a little bit more than dark horse, but not exactly like real. They've not gotten the results that they were looking for, and they can get back to 1-1 in Big 12 play with a win on Saturday, but will they? I think a lot of that's going to come down to Avery Johnson himself. Like, obviously the quarterback is the field general, but when you have a dual threat quarterback that's driving both your running game and your passing game, that's running RPO and all these different things, it's even more heightened in terms of how their performance translates to the results of the team. And I think if you look at Johnson, you just look at him on paper, the first level of stats. He has 60% completion rating, 851 yards, 6 touchdowns to 1 pick, 6 to 1 ain't bad. 62 yards rushing and a couple of rushing TDs on the year. That really doesn't tell the tale with Avery Johnson this year. He went 2 of 6 with 7 yards passing in the final drive of the game at Arizona, a game that they lost on the final possession against Army, down 24-21. He was 4 for 9 for 26 yards and threw the pick that ended the game. And then you go all the way back to the season opener in Dublin against Iowa State. Johnson failed to convert a 4th and 1 on the ground. Like, you're supposed to put the ball in that man's hands and expect that he can get you a yard, but he couldn't on his own 30. Well, down 17-14 in the fourth quarter. Cyclones got the ball back, scored 24-14. Yeah, Kansas State scored again, but it really didn't matter. The game was over. And, I think when you look at Avery Johnson, as he goes, so will the Wildcats. I think that they have a good coaching staff. Chris Kleiman's in his 7th year. But I think that he has to be a bit embattled, really losing to Army at Arizona, and against Iowa State in Dublin. That's a really tough schedule, and I think we're right on that cusp of going from forging through the fire to being broken in the fire. I've never been to Manhattan, Kansas, and I'm sure that the fans are going to bring all of the excitement and intensity needed to make it a really tough place to play on Thursday night. But I still think that UCF is going to be able to go in there. They're going to be able to run the ball. They're going to be able to get some chunk plays. And I think that, like Scott Frost's second year, the first time around, they're going to move to 4-0 and undefeated. And as you look at the rest of the year, I think it shapes up pretty well for UCF. And then I think that there's one more X factor to consider this week. And that's Coach Sean Clark. Former Appalachian State head coach, came to UCF this year to be the offensive line coach, was hospitalized on September 9th. Unfortunately, Coach Clark passed away this week. Hurts my heart, age 50, as a 41-year-old dad, and family man, it just wrenches at my heart that Sean Clark is gone so young. And I think that that's going to be felt in that locker room. And whatever intensity exists in the Manhattan crowd is going to be offset by a deep, burning passion to win one for Coach Clark on the UCF sideline. And I think that they're going to do just that. I think even though the season is on the line for Kansas State in many ways, and I do expect them to bring the kitchen sink, give me the Golden Knights to go into Manhattan and win one for Coach Clark, 27-24. All right, so next up on the docket, we have Indiana -7.5 at Iowa. Did you see what Indiana did to Illinois last week? As Coach Cignetti says, I win, Google me. In Cignetti, we trust at BQPs. I gotta say, it was a beautiful thing. 63-10, and in beating Illinois that way, Indiana both answered questions about whether it's real this year. Yeah, it's real this year. And was it even really real last year? You know, obviously they didn't play the toughest competition in the Big Ten last year. This year, it's going to be a different story, and it looks like they're an even better team. Hoosier quarterback Fernando Mendoza transferred from Cal, totaled 5 touchdowns on the day through the air with 267 yards passing. He is now the betting favorite for Heisman at plus 650, especially now that Oklahoma QB John Mateer, former Washington State quarterback who went to Oklahoma with his offensive coordinator in the offseason, sounds like he's having hand surgery or has just had hand surgery. He's going to be out a month or more, and that puts Mendoza in position to be the Heisman favorite. And I think if you like Mendoza, and you should, because this is an offense that's going to score a ton, and they don't necessarily have to go undefeated or have to win the conference championship for Mendoza to win the Heisman. If you like Mendoza, I think his odds are better this week than they're going to be next week. I think after he stomps Iowa, it's not going to be plus 650. It's going to be plus 500 or somewhere in there, maybe plus 450. And I think he's going to do just that. You know, it's not just Mendoza, but it's junior wide receiver Omar Cooper. He's got 377 yards on 19 catches, averaging almost 20 yards per grab. He's got 5 TDs on those 19 catches, getting into the end zone on almost 25% of his receptions. That's bonkers. I don't necessarily expect that to keep up, but that's what he's done so far, so you have to respect it. I think having a truly dependable number 1 wide receiver is often the linchpin to the most productive offenses in college football. I think Indiana seems to have that in Mendoza and Cooper. And not only have they put up 56, 73, and 63 points in their last 3 games respectively, the defense has held opponents to 9, 0, and 10 points. Similar story to Florida State, right? We have true explosion on offense, and we have some lockdown defense that's being played. Iowa, by contrast, is better on offense than we've seen in a long time. Transfer quarterback from South Dakota State, Mark Gronowski, superstar FCS player, did everything, won every award, come in to really revolutionize the Iowa offense, make it move faster, get the ball in the air more. He's done a bit of that. I mean, look at last week against Rutgers. They went into Rutgers. They won 38-28. It's nothing to shake a stick at. But I'll tell you, the offense hasn't been as impressive as I think anybody really hoped or wanted it to be. And I think on the flip side of that, this defense hasn't been the same type of Iowa defense that we expect to see. Truth be told, the Hawkeye defense is always incredibly talented and tough, especially against the run. But I think Rutgers showed that when you spread Iowa out, you can move the ball. And I expect that Cignetti and the Indiana offense is going to do just that. I'm not going to offer a bunch of ways that the Indiana offense can take apart the Iowa defense, because Curt Cignetti and his front office coaching staff, I got that right, his front office and coaching staff are way smarter than me. So I'm sure in their week of preparation, they've already figured out 100 ways from Sunday that they're going to take Kirk Ferentz's team apart. And with that, I think Indiana only being favored by 7.5 is kind of silly. I think it should be favored by 9.5. I think that they're going to win the game really easily. This is probably a bit bold, but give me Indiana 38-13. I mean, this is a team that keeps winning by 50-plus points. So I think 38 is kind of easy. It reminds me of those early Chip Kelly days, to be totally honest with you. Nobody expected that Oregon could keep putting up 50 points, 60 points, 50 points. And they did. Going back to the Dan Hawkins Boise State days, nobody thought that Boise could keep scoring like that. They kept putting the totals up to 70, 77, 80 points, and they kept clearing them. I think Indiana's going to do that, and I think they're going to beat the hell out of Iowa in Kinnick Stadium. It's going to be loud to start. It's going to be crickets to finish in Kinnick, with Indiana winning 38-13. All right, our 5th and final pick in the top 5 this week is Oregon plus 3.5 at Penn State. Let's look back roughly 10 months to the 2024 Big Ten title game in Indianapolis. Before we get started, I have to give Penn State credit. The fans were generally very nice people. They were very confident in Penn State, and they didn't have a lot of reasons to be. Everybody was just absolutely certain that Penn State was going to beat the hell out of Oregon, which was a little bit comical. And they did have the far better marching band. I mean, that was awesome. The drum major doing backflips and the like. That was super cool to see. The Oregon marching band does not do that. Now, the football is where Oregon really showed out. I was very confident going into last year's game, not just because of James Franklin and his horrific record against top 20 teams. Like, that man cannot win a big game. We know it. And don't give me the first round of the playoffs. It's just he can't. It wasn't that. It was purely based on Oregon's team speed, on their execution, and on their ability to run past and through anyone. And so I had bets on Oregon on the money line at -2.5, at -6.5, and at -8.5. I felt very confident that Oregon would slow down Penn State's vaunted rushing attack and that they would bother Drew Aller enough while scoring more than they needed to win by double digits. And all of those things very nearly came true. It was a very fruitful day, except for that -8.5 bet that I almost won. I just needed one more point. Though getting there was actually more challenging than the final result might indicate. Penn State's backfield, but especially their bulldozer running back, Katron Allen, who had 124 yards on 14 carries and a touchdown, just chewed yardage all day. It was actually a miracle every time they gave Nicholas Singleton the ball. And I understand they've got a thunder and lightning thing, and you want to give Lightning the ball, but he wasn't nearly as scary as Allen. Every time Allen touched the ball, it felt like he went for 5, 6, 7 yards. They only gave it to him 14 times. I had these flashbacks to the 2015 national championship game where Ezekiel Elliott touched the ball like 30 times for Ohio State. That coaching staff under Urban Meyer knew Oregon couldn't stop it, and so they didn't even go in any other direction. They just ran Ezekiel Elliott until the game was over. Now, fortunately, Penn State didn't do that. They tried to balance the attack between Allen and Singleton, and then they got Tyler Warren, all-world tight end, involved quite a bit. He had 7 catches for 84 yards. Multiple of those moved the chains in tight spots and kept possessions going. Drew Aller relied on Tyler Warren, and he's now gone. He's with the Colts. He's doing great things in the NFL. Good luck. We wish you the best, Tyler Warren. And, certainly we saw a little bit of transfer action, and we saw Trevor Pena come in from Syracuse as an outside receiver. He's had a little bit of success thus far, but this is not the same Penn State team. And on the defensive side of the ball, Oregon got a lot better. Lost Derek Harmon, who's now with the Pittsburgh Steelers. That's definitely a loss, but filled those shoes with USC transfer Bear Alexander, who was arguably the best defensive tackle in the portal. You also brought in Dylan Thieneman from Purdue in the safety room, and then you've got Kennedy on the outside in the cornerback room. And I think just overall this defense is better, especially with Bryce Betcher in the middle, still guiding things. So, overall, I think when you look at the matchup between the Penn State offense and the Oregon defense, it didn't really lean in Penn State's favor last year necessarily. Maybe it could have more if they gave the ball to Katron Allen on a more frequent basis, but it didn't. And I think that the talent year over year, that differential skews in favor of Oregon. So I really like that. When you flip it and you look at Oregon on the offensive side of the ball, I'll say it. I like Dante Moore better than Dylan Gabriel. I didn't think Dylan Gabriel really had it. I didn't like his scrambles. I didn't love the ball that he threw. Dante Moore has zip. You see why he was a 5-star blue chip recruit when Chip Kelly was able to lure him to UCLA. Oregon wanted to get him in the first place. And so now he's kind of like come back home. I think he's a much more mature field general. I think that's something that the Ducks really need. And I think that continuity is there. I like him when he gets outside of the pocket a lot more. The balls that he can throw on a rope are so impressive. And I think the backfield tandem of Noah Whittington and Mekhi Hughes is really tough to handle. I mean, you can rotate those guys and just keep grinding a defense. And you have that behind an offensive line that was already really good. And yes, we're only returning one starter, but we have a lot of talent coming in, and you have the number one tackle transfer from the portal, Isaiah World, 6'8", 330 some pounds, coming from Nevada. He has looked really good so far. I think Oregon is ready to really press on Penn State. Who does Penn State not have? Penn State doesn't have Abdul Carter, who was a wrecking shop last year and is already doing big things in the NFL. So I think when you look at that matchup of the Oregon offense and you're talking about the backfield, you add in number one wide receiver, true freshman, but he looks like Jeremiah Smith. He looks like Ryan Williams at Alabama. He looks like a superstar, DeCorian Moore. I think Oregon is in great shape offensively to do what it did last year in the Big Ten title game or more. Yes, let's get it out of the way. This is a road game, but so was last year. I was there. It was 85 to 90% Penn State fans. You couldn't hear yourself think. They did a decent enough job of getting loud, just not at the right time. They were constantly getting loud, like when the players would come to the line after they'd already called the play in the huddle, which is a little too late, but that's neither here nor there. It's fine. Come to Oregon. We'll teach you when to yell. The point is, going into Happy Valley, night game, whiteout, I think this is the kind of game that Oregon lives for. This is the kind of game that it needs to go win. It's the kind of game that James Franklin typically loses. Give me Oregon plus 3.5, and I'll take Oregon to win outright, and not that hard. I think it's going to be an Oregon victory, 38-27. A few quick others receiving votes that we looked at. Baylor, minus 20.5 at Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State is in a state of transition, as my buddy Doug said. This is not just a mental and motivational thing. This is a talent problem. It's going to take time to fix that. Baylor doesn't have a talent problem. They may not show up every possession. They may not look their best every game, but they don't have a talent problem. And for a team in Oklahoma State that got beat to hell by Oregon and by Tulsa, even if there's more motivation, it's hard to see Baylor not winning by 3 touchdowns or more in Stillwater this weekend. Similarly, I know that Illinois obviously took it on the chin. They went into that Indiana game. They were the number 9 team in the country, and they got housed. I think that might happen again this week. USC is a 6.5-point favorite. I've been very wary of USC over the years. I've actually faded USC over the years because there's been so much USC hype, especially early in every season, and they tend to always let down. I've been watching USC. I kind of like USC. Quarterback Jaden Maava, wide receiver Mekhi Lemon, running back Wayman Jordan, like that trio that forms the nucleus of the Trojan offense, it is explosive as hell. I like them. And USC's defense also looks to be more talented than we've seen in years. Now, I mean, they should be, right? It's USC. It's Southern California. They should be the best of the best of the best talent-wise every year. We haven't seen that recently, but I think under Lincoln Riley, we're going to see a different USC team this week. I think we're going to see Illinois take another hard right on the chin this week. I think it's going to be a USC cover, and I think Illinois is going to fall out of the polls. And this whole idea of Brett Bielema's Illinois resurgence is going to be history. I think Notre Dame, similarly, is going to go into Arkansas. No, this is our 3rd straight and 8th straight if you include the top 10 road game that we're talking about a road team. But, man, I really like Notre Dame. They're going into Arkansas. I think Notre Dame finally got right against Purdue. They put a ton of points on the board. Purdue was scoring with them better before the lightning delay than afterwards, and so maybe that did skew the result a little bit. But it really felt like a get-right game for Notre Dame, both offensively and defensively. Meanwhile, Arkansas went to Memphis. I'm not sure why an SEC team like Arkansas is going to Memphis, but they did, and they lost. They found a way to lose that game, 32-31. They kept falling behind and then coming back and reminding themselves that they're an SEC team, and Memphis is not. But they found a way to lose 32-31. And that follows on failing to come back from a 10-point fourth quarter deficit against Ole Miss. So I think, Arkansas is right on that line of being broken. and I think Notre Dame's going to break them. I think Notre Dame's defense is the best that Arkansas will have seen this year, and I think that they will hold them below their averages. And I think that the Irish are going to be just fine on offense. If Memphis is just fine, the Irish are going to be just fine on offense. So give me a lean towards Notre Dame minus 3.5. Sadly, I wish that I could be picking Syracuse and Steve Angeli in this home spot against Duke and Darian Mensah, but Steve Angeli is not going to play in this game. I think even with Jonte Cook on the outside, I don't think it's going to be a smooth transition at quarterback for Q's. I think it's going to take them a game or two. I actually like Duke in this spot now. It's indoors. Darian Mensah's fast. The Duke team seemed to get uncorked against NC State last week. So, not my favorite pick of the week, but I am going to be watching it, and there's just a little part of me that wants to sprinkle something on Duke minus 5.5 at Syracuse this week. And then finally, I've got a home game for you. Northwestern minus 6.5 versus UCLA. Remember all that talk just a second ago about Oklahoma State and how it's going to take more than just a week for them to get right? Same deal goes with UCLA. Theirs is more a motivational problem than a talent problem. Less talent problem. Look, they did okay in the portal. They got number one transfer Nico Iamaleava from Tennessee to run their offense, but obviously that hasn't worked out. Still, I think that they're going to have both a motivation and a talent deficit. I think Northwestern has fought through some really tough games. They played valiantly against Oregon. They lost to Tulane, which I think was tough, but Tulane's a good team despite the Ole Miss result. They went down into New Orleans for that game. And I think that Northwestern is going to be ready to win one at home. I don't think UCLA has the firepower, nor do I think that they have the scheme or the motivation to stick with Northwestern. I think it'll be a fairly low-scoring game. I'm guessing it's going to be like a 20-7, 20-10 type game, but I expect that Northwestern will cover the 6.5. And finally, I just can't get away from it. Ohio State minus 8.5 at UW. I love UW's offense, but they look AAA baseball compared to the New York Yankees of the Ohio State Buckeyes. Like I think there's definitely something to be said for the Huskies offense. I think on the outside, Boston, you have Coleman at running back, Damon Williams at quarterback. I just don't think it's going to be enough against an Ohio State team that's going to put up 30 to 40 points. I don't think the UW defense is good enough to slow them down. So that's what I've got for you this week. Again, we'll keep an eye on all the others receiving votes. We'll obviously tally up the top 5 this week. Hopefully we improve on our 4-1 mark. But hey, if we go 4-1 again, that ain't bad either. Thank you all for the time. I really appreciate you guys dialing in. And as always, may the betting gods bless your picks, and I wish you the best of luck.